everybody. Welcome to my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Leilani. We are back. I know today is not the normal day in which we do our book club, and it's also kind of an odd day because it's the day before Thanksgiving, so the internet is pretty much empty, but being the person that I am, I kind of like it that way. So whoever will be catching this on the replay, this is how we grow, and we do our book club. Where we read spiritual books from all different traditions. And, the goal is just to kind of read them together, have some commentary together, kind of figure out some ideas together. And that's really it. So, up to this point, we have been focusing on the spiritualism, spiritism, and espiritismo movements. And we have read the first 3 books of the 5 books of Allan Kardec's codices, right? And now we have moved on to the medium Chico Xavier as we go through a couple of his books. And the first book that we have decided to go through is The Astral City. And we are on chapter 22 today. Now, mind you, with all of these books that I had just mentioned, you can go to my my YouTube channel to catch up and read along with me on all those previous chapters and or books. But at the same time, don't be afraid to hang out with us tonight, to sit in and listen in, because the truth of the matter is you're always going to get something. Like you don't have to know every single detail of what we're reading and to get your inspirations, you know what I mean? Good evening, Lavetta. All right, guys. So let me share my screen with you all. Okay. I don't understand. Okay. Can you guys see that? Let me know in the comments if you guys can see that. I'm not really sure why this isn't working. Give me one moment. Okay. Let's see. Maybe if it's really odd because normally this doesn't. I normally don't have any issues with sharing screen. So let's see why it's not working all of a sudden. Well, I guess you guys are stuck with me just reading it to you. There's no point in trying to fight that. So chapter 22 is entitled The Hour Bonus. Here we go. Perceiving a sad expression had veiled Laura's face at the mention of her husband, I changed the course of our conversation by inquiring, "What about the hour bonus? Is it some kind of currency?" My hostess' vague expression vanished, and she replied graciously, "It isn't exactly money. It's more of an individual service coupon with exquisite value." Acquisitive? I asked wonderingly. "Well, why not?" she continued. Here in the astral city, the production of food and clothing belongs to the community. The government house runs distribution departments from which these commodities are sent to different ministries. The central storehouse is common property. Everyone cooperates for their prosperity of the public welfare, as we all depend on it for our sustenance. However, those who work are granted certain privileges according to their merits. Each of the city's inhabitants receive the strictly essential provision of food and clothing, but those who earn our bonus are entitled to certain prerogatives in the community. The entity who could not work may find shelter here, but only those who cooperate for the colony's welfare may own their own private home. The idle will be provided with the essential clothing, but devoted workers will be able to satisfy their taste in dress. You see, inactive entities may, through the influence of friends, be lodged in our rest homes or hospital parks. However, only hard-working spirits who strive to gain our bonuses may enjoy the company of those they love and attend places of entertainment and the different schools existing in all the ministries where precious teachings are delivered by wise instructors. It is necessary for us to learn the price of each improvement in the scale of a spiritual ascent. All of us on the working staff of the colony must contribute at least 8 hours of useful service per day. But there is so much to be done in the different sectors of the government house that allows those who are really willing to operate to in 4 extra hours a day. Thus, many people earn as much as 70-hour bonuses a week, not counting those earned in sacrificial missions, when remuneration is doubled and sometimes tripled. But is the hour bonus the only standard of remuneration? Yes, it is the only one we have here. It is applied to all workers in the astral city in both high and low positions. Recalling earthly organizations, I inquired curiously, but how can you reconcile the payment with the nature of the work? If a minister, for instance, receives 8-hour bonuses in an ordinary day, what will a driver receive? The same compensation? Isn't the former work of a higher nature than the latter's? My hostess smiled. She smiled at my question and then explained. Well, it all depends. In positions of responsibility, as well as in humble ones, if the work requires self-sacrifice and abnegation, the corresponding remuneration is properly calculated. However, to give a more thoughtful answer to your question, it's first necessary to discard certain earthly prejudices altogether. The nature of our work is a problem of the utmost importance, but only on earth does its solution present such great difficulties. Most incarnate men are still trying their first steps in the spirit of service and learning simple elementary lessons in the performance of their missions in the different walks of life. So it is essential that earthly remunerations be fixed with scrupulous care. All material earnings are but transitory acquisitions. Yet we often see people obsessed by profit, who, on passing over, leave enormous fortunes to be recklessly dissipated by their heirs. Others accumulate bank accounts that become the cause of endless worries to themselves and a source of discord in their family. And still, on the other hand, we must keep in view the fact that 70% of the earthly executives are still far from being conscious of the moral responsibilities inherent in their positions, and that the same may be said of an approximately equal percentage of those toiling under their direction. The majority of them spend their lives pleading lack of professional enthusiasm, yet it would never enter their heads to doubt their right to the remunerations corresponding to the positions they so inadequately hold. Governments and firms deploy doctors who neglect their sacred duty, turning to other channels of activity instead. Workmen pride themselves in wasting the time for which they are paid. Where is the quality of work? In all sectors of public life, in both high and low positions, one finds experts who have never fully realized the responsibility of their obligations and who, like poisonous flies on bread, avail themselves of magnanimous laws to claim all sorts of facilities, bonuses, and pensions. You may be sure, however, that they will pay a bitter price for their carelessness. The time seems to be still distant when the earth's social institutions will be able to evaluate the quality of man's work. But in the higher spirit plane, work is never assessed without taking into consideration the moral effort exerted. I think it's really important to pause here, right? Because when we think about this, what's really being said here is that all work is worth doing. All work is worth doing well. And even though that is true, if that work is approached carelessly or with no moral intent, then you might as well not have done it. I mean, it's literally as simple as that. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can hear here in the book, in the Astral City book, that it's very much appreciated and that they acknowledge all work is important and it's necessary. But what gets evaluated, what gets seen by spirit, is in the approach, in the execution, in the effort, in the intention. That's the part that matters. So I'll give you an example. You're a nurse at a hospital, and the role that you play as a nurse is the most important role that could ever be asked of anyone on this planet. Honestly, you are so vital. And you know this. You understand that your role is super important and you do your best to do it well, right? Now, your coworker who has the same job as you do decides on the opposite, decides not to do it well because it's a job and it's an annoying job and she has to clean up people's throw up and people's shit and she has to change blood and she has to dress, wounds and she has to clean beds and she has to shower and she has to feed and she's looking at it all as this is work and I hate this. This sucks. That is the perfect example as to spirit being completely understanding that both of these women are doing a very important job. Both of these nurses are doing a very, very important job, necessary. And right off the bat, they're both going to get rewarded for doing that work because it is necessary. But the one who approaches that work with a higher moral intention of, I show up to work because I love what I do. I show up to work for the people. I show up to work to give of myself, to sacrifice of myself. I show up to work to do the best that I can do. I show up to work to be the best that I can be, versus the other one who complains all the time. There's obviously going to be a meritorious difference. And what Spirit is saying here is that we're not going to reward that. Please understand that just because, like, we acknowledge what you're doing is important, but that's not what's going to save you on this side. And to take it a step further, the nurse that approaches everything with this moral high ground, right? And I don't know, the garbage man who approaches his work in the same moral high ground as that nurse. He shows up, loves to do his job, loves to get up early, feel he takes his job as like a form of exercise and where he gets his body nice and strong, got to pick up heavy containers, toss it, feels like big Superman and like, and he's got like all of these positive and wonderful perspectives. He understands like, oh man, without me this place would be disgusting and like, he takes pride in the fact that his work has meaning. And his coworker, same as the nurse's coworker, just complaining, "Oh, I hate this job. It smells so bad. I always go home smelling. I can't. My wife and kids don't want to spend time with me." Right? In these two separate scenarios, God would give the same spiritual merit to both the nurse and the garbage man who approached their work the way that they did than they would the nurse and the nurse being better than the garbage man and the garbage man. So that's the next step. They're saying that all work is valid. And so by saying that, by acknowledging that, there's no such thing as, well, this person's job is better than this person. There are jobs that have more responsibility. There are positions of privilege that come with responsibility, consequence of that privilege. Yes, that's true. But that does not make them any more meritorious on a spiritual level than the garbage man or the guy who cleans out the morgue, or it doesn't make them better on a meritorious scale. Okay? So I hope we all understand that. Let me take a sip before I keep going. So these words awakened a new train of thought in my mind. Seeing how interested I was in the subject, Laura continued to speak. The real profit must be of a spiritual nature. And in our organization, the actual value of the hour bonus varies according to the nature of the work performed. Thus, in the Ministry of Regeneration, we have the regeneration hour bonus. In the Ministry of Elucidation, we have the elucidation hour bonus, and so on and so on. Spiritual merit is always taken into account, so our individual services files specifically the essence of our work. Fundamental acquisitions include experience and education, an increase in divine blessings, and the extension of opportunities. Now, according to that point of view, assiduity and abnegation are by far the most important factors. As a rule, most of us in this colony of transition go through a time of preparation for our return to Earth. Hence, it's obvious that a man who devoted 5,000 hours to naming tasks have achieved a great amount of sublime effort on his own behalf. One who worked 6,000 hours in the ministry of sedation will have become wise. May we spend our bonuses as we please. However, I'm sorry, we may spend our bonuses as we please. However, our individual file with its record of time we spend in useful service is still a more valuable asset to us. It is and entitles us all sorts of privileges. So again, what Laura is saying here is, even if you earn all of these hour bonuses because of your merit, or quote unquote because of your approach to your work and because of your intention of your work, you earn these hourly bonuses. With Even with that, they would prefer that you getting those things being less valued as how you actually spent your time. So sure, you earned 6 hourly bonuses meaning you worked 6 hours more than you should have, or you equidated, meaning you did work in such a way with such a loving manner that it equates to 6 hours worth more, right? Is still less than how many hours overall, like how much did you actually put in to useful service, right? Because I think we need to make a distinction here. We need to make a distinction here. When we're talking about work, yes, work is service. Having a job is being of service to the colony, being of service to your community, being of service to your country, whatever. Just by participating in the economy, you are purposeful, right? You have purpose. But what they're saying here is that that type of work is still different from useful service, because not all jobs, for example, have are by nature of a service nature, especially not here in America. Especially not here in America. There are plenty of jobs that are not of a service nature. They're very much of a self-serving nature, right? And so the point is that how much time did you spend doing that? How much time did you spend actually doing something, whether it's your full-time job or when you're outside of work, that you would consider useful service? Because that is more valuable than how many hourly bonuses you received for being, the golden star child at work. You know what I'm saying? And let's not forget, for those of us who actually do participate in a lot of service and community service, it's a quiet job. We don't advertise this, right? And that's yet another thing about useless service. That's another reason why it's more valued to take note of that. Because when we do service, we do so quietly. It's about dignity, it's about respect, it's not about taking an Instagram photo with a homeless guy when you make, you know what I mean? Like it's not about, making a post on Facebook about like it's just not about that. And I think it's a beautiful thing in this book that they acknowledged that that's something to be seen as. Anyway, so my curiosity seemed to know no bounds as I continued to ask so many questions on this subject. So, may we spend our bonuses on behalf of like friends? Like, I know where he's going with this, by the way, you guys. Like, I'm reading this line and I'm like, oh, this motherfucker, he wants to see if maybe he could do useful services by spending his hour bonuses on, people like in a charitable way, and like to see if that'll like like equal out. Let's see. I'm curious because that's what I think he's trying to say. Um, Laura answered, certainly. We may share the fruit of our efforts with whomever we please. It's every faithful worker's inalienable rights. Thousands and thousands of people here in the Astral City have benefited from the fruits of friendship and brotherly devotion. Lysias's mother smiled as she continued her observations. The longer our period of useful service, the greater the number of intercessions we are allowed. Here, we cannot help realizing that everything has its price, and that in order to receive, we must give. Asking, therefore, is a most significant thread in the fabric of our lives. For only those who have attained a certain spiritual status are in the position to ask favors and dispense help. Woo! Woo! That is loaded. That is a loaded. Well, what about inheritance? I inquired abruptly. Well, it's a very simple matter here, she replied with a smile. For instance, in my own case, the time is drawing near when I shall have to return to the physical sphere. Well, I possess at the present moment in my service account 3,000 assistance hour bonuses. I may not leave them to my daughter, who is about to arrive, as they will have to revert to the community. The only thing my family will inherit is the home. However, my service record entitles me to intercede on her behalf, procuring work and friendly cooperation for her, and precise assistance for myself from our colony's organization during my stay on the physical sphere. Besides, I shall return to Earth endowed with a higher degree of experience acquired during my years of cooperation in the Ministry of Assistance, which should contribute to the hoped for success of my new human existence. We're going to get back to that. So I was about to express my admiration for the simple process of earning and profiting, cooperating, and serving in comparison with the prevailing principles on earth when I heard the low murmur of voices approaching the house. And before I could make my remark, Laura declared, "Here are our dear ones back." And she went to welcome them. So I find this interesting here. I find this interesting, this line where she says, uh, my service record entitles me to intercede on her behalf, procuring work and friendly cooperation from her, and precise assistance for myself from our colony's organization during my stay in the physical sphere. I shall return to Earth endowed with a higher degree of experience acquired during my years of cooperation, which should contribute to a more success in my human experience. So I hope you guys get what's being said here, because there's a reason, for example, why each and every one of you are here watching my live. There's a reason, for example, why each and every one of you who have decided to take on a spiritual journey are now finding themselves discovering their faculties and their gifts, find themselves discovering their mediumistic abilities, finding themselves discovering their divination abilities, finding themselves discovering their connection to the dead and to the other side and to their ancestors. There's no accident happening here. These are privileges, you guys. We came to this earth with certain privileges. That's what they're saying here in this chapter. We came to this earth with certain privileges because we put in the work, both in our previous lives and in our in between life in these astral cities and in these astral places where we've built up merit and we worked and we served communities in these sort of afterlives, that gave us enough quote unquote brownie points, right, to then be able to give us gifts and give us privileges here when we're on earth. And many of these privileges include mediumistic abilities and being able to interact with spirits for our counsel, being able to intercede on the work of spirits of the dead, and to advocate and to work with these spirits of the dead. Um, and then, of course, be able to have successful lives. This idea of not having to live impoverished, not having to live in trauma, not having to live in these spaces that unfortunately exist in our world. It's this idea, according to this chapter, that because we put in the work in our previous lives, because we put in the work in our afterlife, we have been blessed to be born into the situations we were born into, despite the flaws of the people around us, despite the flaws of the systems that are in place around us. Despite these things, we manage to get to a point in our lives where we have discovered our faculties, where we communicate and intercede with the dead, and have the privilege of exploring our spirituality for the service of mankind. That is why traditions like this, spiritualism, espiritismo, have a very sort of high moral standing of their practitioners and of their followers. there's this sense of like, yo, I mean, the sheer fact that you're here means that like you've worked to this point. So that only means there's more responsibility. That only means you still have more shit to do. But now there's like an awareness you would not have had you put in the work previous spaces. Anyway, was chapter 2. Check chapter 3 really. Let me just see how it is to see if we can actually do it tonight. Oh yeah, it's a short chapter for sure. Chapter 3 titled The Art of Listening. I could not help feeling sorry for our talk was interrupted, for Laura's elucidations were most stimulating. Lysias had come back in evident good spirits. "Hello! Haven't you retired yet?" he asked me with a smile. While the two young men took their leave, he invited me cordially to come down to the garden. "You haven't seen the moonlight from this side of town," he said. While Laura talked with her daughters, I followed Lysias into the garden. It was really a magnificent sight. Accustomed as I was to the hospital grounds, which were secluded among large trees, I had not yet had the opportunity to contemplate the wonderful spectacle of a moonlit night from the spacious quarters of a Galaxnasis of the Ministry of Assistance. Exquisitely colored gloxinias gloxinias enhanced the beauty of the scenery and provided a vivid background for fragrant snow white lilies, which were slightly tinged with blue at the base of their cups. I drew in deep breaths, feeling a wave of new energy fill my whole being. In the distance rose the towers of the government house, bathed in a beautiful display of lights. I was hushed into admiration. Only after some time did I manage to speak it all out. What a night! I have never experienced such peace. Lysias smiled and explained, "All the well-balanced inhabitants of the colony have pledged to avoid emitting negative currents of thought. Thus, the effort of the majority merges into an almost continual prayer. Hence the atmosphere of peace all around us." Bitch! Tell me that that little statement right there did not just hit. Tell me that that does not hit. And you know what I'm talking about. You know what, the shift in atmosphere, the shift in space when you walk into somebody's house and this is a person of God. Like when you walk into a person's house who is a person of God who prays every single day, who like has their space clean and like always thinks positively and is a very like good, giving, positive person. When you walk into their space, I'm telling you that energy shifts and it's true. It is very much like being in a space of just pure peace. The air is lighter. The air has a sweetness to it. You can breathe better. Your heart relaxes. Like it's a whole different vibe. Now, let's counter that. I'm sure every single person in this live right now has been to a person's house who was far from holy. Far from holy, okay? And you felt that shift the minute you walked through that door. You walked through that door, the air was heavy. You could feel the static in the air. You could feel the anger in the air. You could feel just gross. The atmosphere has a natural darkness to it, like it's dimmer versus when you're in these other spaces where there's a natural light that just glows, even though there's not much light in the space. Um, these are real physical things that you can perceive off of people. And what he's saying is like, yo, our entire colony is like this. Our entire colony has made an agreement that we're not going to waste time on this negative bullshit, that we're just not going to go there. And this is not about being naive. This is not about pushing away hard truths. That's not what this is. Because you've seen in the previous chapters when difficult conversations had come up, when conversations that would bring about melancholy, when conversations that would bring about sadness would come up, you saw how they handled it in these previous chapters. And they didn't handle it with aggression. They didn't handle it with more negativity on top of negativity. They didn't handle it with, smart ass remarks. No, they handled it with positivity. They handled it with love. They handled it with compassion. They handled it with understanding. And they also handled it with boundaries. There was a few occasions in previous chapters where you heard people say, I would rather not speak about this at this time. That's important. You know? For some time we gazed in wonder at the soul-stirring scenery, trying to absorb the night's opalescent light and soothing calm. Then we returned to the living room where Lysias approached a small radio-like apparatus. My curiosity was instantly aroused, and I wondered what we were going to hear. Messages from Earth? My kind friend reading my thoughts explained. We aren't going to hear any voices from the planet. Our broadcasts here are based on vibratory currents far more subtle than those on Earth. But are there no means, I inquired, of picking up broadcasts from Earth? Of course there are. And do they do it in all the ministries. But in our home, we must concern ourselves only with our present condition and activities. After all, the work programs in the different departments, the tidings from higher spheres, and the lofty teachings are much more important to us than any earthly problems. The remark was just, but still bound by domestic ties, I insisted. Do you really think so? What about our relatives left behind? Our parents? Our children? I was expecting that question. You see, my friend, on the material plane, we often misinterpret situations. Most of us suffer from emotional hypertrophy. There on earth, we are slaves to the exclusivism and inclined to limit our family to those bound to us by blood ties. We go through life heedless of the true principles of brotherhood, and although we preach them to everyone, when it comes to putting our beliefs into practice, nothing counts but our own flesh and blood. Here, however, life presents a different aspect. We have to conquer our old weaknesses and rectify injustices. We are told that in the early days of the colony, every home possessed the necessary equipment to pick up broadcasts from the physical sphere. Everybody insisted on hearing news of his earthly relations, so that, from the ministry of regeneration and to that of elevation, the city's inhabitants lived with their nerves on edge. Disturbing rumors interfered with the good order of activities in general. Sometimes whole families were thrown into a state of utter confusion because of bad tidings from their dear ones still on earth. When collective catastrophes on earth in any way affected those lodged in the colony, they assumed the proportion of public calamities. According to our records, the city was more like a purgatorial zone than the place of rest and instruction it was meant to be. Please listen to this really quick. According to our records, the city was more like a purgatorial zone than a place of rest and instruction as it was meant to be. And that this atmosphere that was created was because the people in the astral city couldn't mind their own business. They had to keep tuning in on what was happening on Earth and the negativity and all the garbage that they were being exposed to on Earth, all of those ties to material things cause that energy to infect the colony. Okay. Now, this goes in the same way as someone were to ask you, so, when you die, do you go to heaven, hell, or purgatory? And most people will say purgatory because, number one, we really don't have any kind of real, true, evidential information regarding heaven or hell, but we do have a lot of evidence of going into this sort of in between state. Like a lot of evidence. We have a lot of out of body experiences. We had a lot of NDEs, near death experiences. We have a lot of mediums, and we have a lot of spirits from those spaces that tell us um, that there are these in between places. And these in between places, ironically, mirror what the person's mental state is when they leave this earth. So if they themselves are in a state of being tied to earthly things in whatever capacity, then their in between state, their in between reincarnation state will be purgatorial like in manner. It'll be confusing. Whereas someone who passes away with and has always or has a mental state simply accepting things as is, understanding that death is just a transition, it's nothing to be fearful of, blah blah blah. They will oftentimes report back that their in state is much more of a state of light and a state of instruction and state of peace and rest where they given downloads while healing themselves. We both account and everything between. So what we're starting to notice is that in between states are very much a part of us and are very much within our control. In the same way that their colony can regain their control by simply cutting those cords with those earthly desires. The late governor was perhaps a little too tolerant, and as you know, indiscriminate kindness engenders indiscipline and failure. But 2 centuries ago, one of the devoted ministers of the Divine Union urged the governor to change the deplorable situation. Supported by the ministry, the governor forbade the widespread communication with Earth. There was great opposition, but the generous minister who had introduced the measure called a witness Jesus' teaching. Let the dead bury their dead, and in a short time the innovation was successfully implemented. Still, I insisted, it would be most comforting to have news of our dear ones on earth. Wouldn't we feel more at rest? Lysias, who had been standing by the receiving end without turning it on, continued his explanation. Okay, now take yourself as an example to see whether that would be wise. Would you be prepared, for instance, to hear that a beloved son was maligning another or being maligned himself? Would you maintain the necessary serenity, waiting with faith, and acting in accordance with the divine precepts? If someone informed you that one of your brothers had just been imprisoned as a criminal, would you be strong enough to keep calm? I smiled disappointingly. We shouldn't try to look for news from lower spheres, Lysias continued obligingly, except when we are able to render a just service. We must always keep in mind that no one can help justly and efficiently when under emotional or mental stress. So, We have to go through suitable preparation before risking any new context with our earthly relations. If they offered an adequate field for spiritual love, the exchange would be worthwhile. But unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of incarnate people have not yet attained even a moderate degree of self control. Most of them lead haphazard lives, drifting with the high and low tides of their material conditions. In spite of our sentiments, we must avoid being drawn into lower vibratory spheres. Giving evidence of my stubbornness, I still argued the point. But Lysias, your father is back on Earth. Wouldn't you like to communicate with him? Of course I would, he answered kindly. Whenever we deserve the joy and the contact between us is considered opportune, we visit him in his new physical body. But we mustn't forget that we are fallible creatures and, as such, should refer to the competent departments and let them decide about the opportunity and merit of such visits. That specialized work is done by the Ministry of Communication. Besides, it's well remembered that although it is easier to descend from higher to a lower sphere than the other way around, there are certain principles regulating communication between the different spheres that must be taken into consideration. They tell us that a thorough understanding of those still in the lower zones is essential to render them adequate help. It's just as important to know how to speak as to know how to listen. This colony was in constant state of unrest because of its inhabitants, not knowing how to listen, were unable to help efficiently, and thus the spiritual atmosphere here was often sadly impaired. At Ho's irrefutable arguments, I lapsed into a brooding silence, while Lysias turned on the receiver under my watchful eye. That is the end of chapter 23. Obviously, when we get to the next live, we will be on chapter 24 called The Soul Stirring Appeal. And this is obviously going to be the moment when we find out what this little machine is and what they are planning on listening to. Overall, though, I hope you enjoyed this live. I hope you enjoyed this reading. I apologize. I have such a dry throat today. But it is now time to take questions. Oh my gosh, Lavetta, I love you. You definitely have so much to say that is like so good. It's like so juicy. Okay, so I went back to your comment about socialism. Yes, the colony is very similar to socialism. It's socialism. It's socialism. So yeah, it's this idea that everyone gets everything that they need. For sure. Everyone gets what they need. You know, the healthcare, the clothing, the shelter, the food. They get everything that they need, and all of it is quality. They're not it's not like they're saying, "Oh, this homeless person only gets like the stale bread and everyone else gets the normal bread." No, no, no. Everyone is getting quality everything of their bare necessities. And that the ones who actually contribute to the colony will then also reap an additional benefit to just your baseline essential needs. And those additional benefits can be whatever you want them to be. And it could also be time spent doing whatever you want to do. So there's places of entertainment, there's fancy restaurants, there's universities that you can go to. So there's different ways in which you can take advantage um, of your merit and of your work. Or you can bank them, and banking them, quote unquote, putting them in your file is a way in which to then kind of cash them out, if you will, when you get reincarnated again, or when you need to intercede on someone's behalf, or when you need to basically call in a favor. These merit points, if you will, are sort of like your currency in that sense. Oh, thank you, Big Russ. So good to see you. Oh my God, the 12-step program for sanctification. Word. Word. Yep, this idea of being refined by fire. Yeah, essentially. That's exactly it. Yeah. So I just want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me tonight, this lovely Wednesday night, the day before a Thanksgiving holiday. I'm pretty sure everyone is at home right now, cooking, preparing for their events tomorrow. So for those of you who did decide to take a little 1 hour break from the chaos to hang out with me, I truly appreciate you. And for those who are watching on the replay, I hope you enjoy this live. I hope you join us again next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you also want to get a little reading done by me, I will be on TikTok and on Instagram at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just 1 hour before the live, just to do a few little readings for people online, just to kind of get some social media movement happening because I'm not really consistent with posting. So I figured, hey, maybe if I can be a consistent live, maybe that will help. But we'll see. We'll see how that rolls out. Anyways, thank you guys so much. Happy holidays, and always remember, this is how we grow. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe.